Welcome to Ink and Flame. I'm your host, Tina Koutras, and today we're sitting down to speak with Beth Kander about I Made It Out of Clay. Hi, Beth. How are you?
Doing well, Tina. Thanks so much for having me on your lovely podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to chat with you. So, I Made It Out of Clay blends humor, grief, and magical realism. What inspired you to write such a unique story?
This one actually has a very odd genesis of where the seed of the story came from, which is that I was working on a completely different story, actually like a ghost story. I was on deadline for it with my agent, and that of course meant that I was up for procrastination. When a friend texted me this link to a competition to pitch a Hanukkah rom-com, I was like, oh, interesting. Yeah, maybe I should do that. Clicked on the link, and the deadline was the next day. So I was like, goodbye, book project. I'm going to brainstorm a bunch of funny Hanukkah rom-coms. And the thing is, I love things that are a little bit weird, a little bit off. I love a rom-com, but I didn't actually find myself generating traditional rom-com pitches. Like, all of them were a little bit strange in some way or another, maybe because I was in the ghost mindset. But the idea that I wound up submitting for this competition was I Made It Out of Clay, which is a riff on the Hanukkah song, like, I have a little dreidel, I made it out of clay. But there's also a monster in Jewish folklore made out of clay, the golem. So I made it a Hanukkah golem story about a desperate woman who has to attend her younger sister's wedding, hence the rom-com part. And then it mudslides into something darker when she builds a golem and takes him to the wedding. So it started out with just that very simple premise for the film pitch. It wound up winning the film pitch competition, which did not come with any sort of monetary prize. Like, spoiler alert, you don't make money fast being a writer ever. Some people do, very few, the few, the proud. So the entire prize was just a really well-designed movie poster that featured Paul Rudd as my golem, Paul Mudd. And it went a little viral. And I started getting inquiries from folks being like, hey, is this a real movie? Do you have the screenplay? And I literally had a paragraph. I had nothing. So I called my literary agent. She was like, do you think you can write this as a book? And I started taking the time to actually take this tiny little paragraph. And that's really when the grief and the deepening the folklore and magical realism within this story of coming to terms with turning 40 and reconnecting with your sister, and all these other things that the book wound up being about really started coming through later. They weren't there as the germ of an idea, but I think especially because my background is in playwriting and I like to tell a lot of different kinds of stories, blending those different elements, even in a really otherworldly story, is what felt totally natural.
Wow, that sounds incredible. The book explores Jewish folklore and modern struggles. How do your personal experiences shape the narrative?
Yeah, well, first of all, I've had a lot of folks ask me, if my main character is me. And I will say, no, we certainly share some identity markers, but Eve is not me. I'm a happily married person with 2 kids, not a child free about to turn 40, but I love her. She's my best friend. I know Eve, the main character, and all of her struggles are so relatable because some have been mine, some have been friends. And that part I feel is what really grounds it in the real world, especially for all of us women out there reading stories like these and looking for ourselves in stories like these, the pressure to compete and the milestones your friends hit before you hit them, or vice versa, the guilt of when you're further along in your career or this or that. All of that is definitely pulled from personal experience. The Jewish folklore part, while I have never built a golem, I have always been a folk and fairy tale lover. That's really what I came up on as a reader. But I hadn't spent a whole lot of time thinking about, oh, well, what if I pulled this into my stories? So I got to tap into the research nerd part of me. I knew a lot about golems from pop culture, like the X-Files and other places that it has popped up. But I loved getting to dig in on the text and the history of that creature from Jewish folklore. And Judaism is a really verbal tradition. So even the words of the root word of golem and where do we first see references to this sort of thing were all really intriguing to me. And finding ways to honor the tropes and like how a golem story, how this particular monster story sort of has to go, but then finding ways to connect it with my personal experiences and make it into a narrative that would somehow be relatable, even though it's about a woman who builds a monster, was the super fun challenge of writing it.
That's wicked. So, what was the most challenging part of writing it? I mean, the timelines definitely sound like they kind of hit you by surprise, but what would you consider to be the most challenging part of writing I Made It?
Yeah. At the risk of getting a little emotional about this response, I will say there was the anticipated challenge and then an unanticipated challenge. The anticipated challenge was exactly what you said, the time frame of my agent being like, hey, if there's interest already, how fast can you write this? Let's get it out there. And I have never drafted a book so fast in my life, had my agent take it out on sub so fast, had it sell so fast. I mean, from the time that I wrote the entry for the competition that was just a paragraph long to the time we sold it at auction was less than 6 months.
Wow.
And that's in publishing, like that's insanity. Like that's
Yes.
unprecedented. So it was a real pressure cooker. I mean, I was working on it constantly while maintaining my day job and having 2 small children. And so that was the anticipated challenge, was just managing all of that process. The unanticipated challenge is that the main character in the book, and this is why now a lot of people think that she must be me. She's, manufacturing and manifesting a whole bunch of other things, but her core sadness that she has to encounter is the fact that she lost her beloved father very suddenly to a heart attack. And about 6 months after selling the book, more than a year before it would wind up coming out, I lost my beloved father to a sudden heart attack. So then the revision process and the promotion and interviews process, when that loss was still so fresh, to be talking about a book that has a lot of fun and lighthearted themes. And I wanted to also just be talking about the joy, but found myself really in the mix with the grief. That was really, really hard. And I would say it's not that it's easy now, but now that it's been about a year, I've realized that it is also a gift to get to talk about the hard stuff, and the way that stories let us do that, and the way that like your questions and these conversations let us talk about the power of stories to help readers not feel alone in those moments, has actually also been really healing. But it was throughout the revision and like initial promotion process, it was really hard to realize these things that we drop into our stories sometimes really become real.
Wow, that's a powerful response. So, sorry. So, the golem is such a fascinating figure in Jewish folklore. What drew you to incorporate it into I Made It Out of Clay? I know that it was like an idea in a little contest, but what was the foundation for that idea that just seemed to kind of land in that contest?
Yeah, luckily this is a very straight up fun answer. It started as truly like wordplay. I am a word nerd, and so I loved that I could have I Made It Out of Clay be both about a golem and meet this Hanukkah competition's guidelines. So that was the initial impetus. But I will also say, like at this point, I Made It Out of Clay is very much Hanukkah story in the way that Die Hard is a Christmas movie. Like the holidays are happening in the background. It's not what the book is about. The book is about the monsters and the family and the friends and all of this. So the other thing that was great about like pulling in the golem to this story is thinking about what makes us human and how easy it is to blur those lines. And especially like for readers of romantasy and things who want to be able to like connect with that monster, but aren't afraid of those questions of like, but what's real? But when is it crossing the line? And where should we really be, giving our hearts or not? That was really fun to get to play with in the story. And I had to remind myself from all of my golem research, the golem isn't a human. The golem is this soulless but protective being. And like, we could all in this day and age understand the appeal of a protector, right? Like someone
Right.
who's there, who's like, I'm just here to take care of you.
Yeah.
Makes it really easy to blur the lines. And so there was a lot like built into that existing folklore that, even though it hasn't really been used in this particular context a lot, made it something that was really fun to play with while also like rooted in the actual lore, and the storyteller in me just loved getting to play in that sandbox.
Yeah, imagine. So how did you approach weaving the Jewish traditions and folklore into the contemporary setting?
I think that it was made easy by the fact, like, I am Jewish, and there are a lot of the rituals and things that we do that, much like the Catholic Church or something, like even in a contemporary setting, there's just some things that feel really old and ancient, but you incorporate them into your modern life. And so I was trying to carry that sensibility into the story. So there are moments with Eve, the main character, remembering her grandmother, her immigrant grandmother, and the stories that she told, and her thick Yiddish accent, and this sort of old world sensibility. I could bring in the characters that had those authentic voices to help sort of build out the world of where is this tradition coming from? And then Eve, who's much more of a secular, like, what does any of this mean to me? I'm going out, dancing with my friends. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. What are the parts that do draw us back in? And I will say that, like, when someone in your life is getting married, like a big joyful reason, when you lose someone, like those huge highs and lows of life, I think in real life tend to make us return to our roots or remember why we stepped away from something. But like, it forces us to sort of contend with where we came from and what do we believe. So in the world of the story, that's sort of like a nice built-in raising of the stakes that you can draw on ancient traditions. You can pull in these words and feelings and recent immigration stories, and it like very quickly threads together this sort of believable tale, even of something unbelievable going on.
Yeah, okay. So I like that. That was a great answer. The book balances some heavy themes like grief and anti-Semitism with moments of humor. How did you find that balance?
I honestly don't know how to do it any other way. I feel like that's how I make it through the big things in my life, is I have to find the humor or the people who will remind me how to laugh. Like, that's what I need to get through the hard stuff. And I think there's a lot of storytelling tradition around that too. I'm a huge theater nerd. Like, I grew up a theater kid, lifelong theater person. And I remember learning from a theater teacher early on that one of the masters of this was Shakespeare. That, like, in the comedies, you will have this like gut punch of something real and emotional, and this monologue that comes out of nowhere and explains the universe. And in the tragedies, you will have these ridiculous, over the top characters that come in and make you laugh right after a big death scene. And so, even like as a really young theater artist and writer, it was like permission, like, well, if Shakespeare can put comedy and tragedy side by side, anyone can. This is right. Like, this is canon. So in terms of what I want to write, but also what I want to read, like, I don't want something that's just bleak and like grief, anti-Semitism, war, strife, what misery. But also, I mean, yeah, I love a fluffy rom-com on its own, but I also love when it like hits you in the feels. So yeah, that balance, I think it's the language that I speak as a reader and that I hope to keep conveying as a writer.
Yeah. So the story touches on the rise of anti-Semitism, and how important was it for you to address this in your book?
That was something that honestly I really wrestled with. It's not something I write about a lot. It's not something that I even, have historically talked about a lot. But the more that I was writing the book while living in the world and listening to the news, and I do feel like I should point out this was in 2022 that I was writing the book. So not even the most recent round of news, but it was, a couple years after the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. That is really what was on my mind, was very much just here in the United States. Domestic anti-Semitism was already experiencing a surge in the late teens, early 20s. And at some point I felt like I couldn't not have something to say about it. When it was impacting how I felt about entering Jewish spaces, when it was making me think like, do I send my kids to Hebrew school this week? Is it safe after there was a synagogue shooting last week? The same way that, we have to think about it in all sorts of other contexts. I really hadn't been making those calculations until those last few years. And so as I got into the story and realized I'm writing a story that's about this creature that is from Jewish folklore created to protect the community when it's under threat. How do I not make it about someone who's not just feeling something in her personal life, but is tuned in, to these very real threats? So I knew that I had no idea just how much critique that could open it up to, even though I will say to anyone who has read the book start to finish, no big spoilers, but the message is always that the way to contend with any kind of hatred is to connect with everyone around us. Like, that's without giving any specific spoilers, like, that's the message. But I think that, yeah, our authors from any marginalized group that wind up even a little bit, and it's not the majority of what the story is about, but even a little bit touching on those themes are going to wind up being part of a not always friendly online conversation and being part of that reality in a more engaged way. So yeah, I put a lot of thought into whether or not I should even, touch that third rail. And I didn't know an honest way to write the story without incorporating that element.
Yeah, so the counterpoint to that is that though it may create a divisive opinion for someone, the reverse is also true, that somebody else is going to feel seen or heard because they can relate, or they can be a part of that conversation that's happening in the book.
Yes, Tina, thank you for saying that. That's so beautifully articulated. And I think that's true for so many groups that, like, you too, you have to remember you're also representing, making people feel seen, and hopefully inviting people into the conversation. Like, you don't have to see yourself as, oh, that is my story, but you can see, like, oh, but I have a story and they have a story and I have felt this kind of exclusion and they have felt, and that's another way to create more inclusion. So thank you, yes, for that very important counterpoint.
So Eve is such a relatable and flawed protagonist. How did you approach building her character?
Like I said, Eve is definitely, she's my best friend. I know Eve. I would hang out with Eve. I would, as someone who lived for many years in the South, I would bless her heart all of the time because she's so flawed and she's making so many bad choices right now at this point in her life, which does not mean that she's a bad person. It's another actually great counterpoint of like the unlikable female character. I have had a lot of folks be like, oh, she's the worst. She's so whiny. She makes all these bad choices. And I'm like, yeah, that's the point. I don't want a character that's making every good choice right off the bat, because otherwise, what are you cheering for?
Yeah,
right?
Where's the story?
Where's the story? She went out, she was kind to everyone, and everything went well. The end. That's not a
We
story.
all lived happily ever after.
Exactly. I would like it for my real life. That sounds great, but not in any book that I read. I want conflict. I want crisis. And so Eve has a lot of conflict and a lot of crisis. And approaching building her character, I was really able to just lean into what will get you down to that moment where you're so low that you feel you need this otherworldly force to come in and just fix it for you, because you just want to like turn over the wheel. Like, everything is falling apart, right? Like, the economy is in peril. The big exterior world is a dumpster fire. There's anti-Semitism. You lost your beloved dad. Your sister and mom are barely speaking to you. Your friends are all getting married and having babies, and like, you can't go on date 3. To just pile on to this poor woman was, authors are mean sometimes. Like, you got to make your character miserable to make them desperate enough to do something crazy. So yeah, building her out, it was like, how do I do that while also making her someone that can like sneak in there with a sly joke and be showing up for her friends even when she's not feeling like her full self, so that we do still see like why she's likable and how, when she's not at this worst moment, she's someone that you want to cheer for. And I think that's the balance when you're going to make your character do a few terrible things. You also have to find their humanity and what you like about them. So like, I love her humor and her just like unapologetic, I'm going to wear this ugly blinking sweater and just go out into the world and dance with my friends.
So the Gollum, Paul Mudd, I think that's hilarious, is both protective and unsettling. How did you develop his personality and his role in the story?
So I love this question because I feel like I actually have an answer for it. And like, even 5 years ago, I might not have, and I would have had a lot more trouble with him. We are living in the age of AI, which I have a lot of big feelings about as a writer. I think that there's clearly tremendous societal benefits and also lots of big questions, and have thought that for quite some time. My in is like, how am I going to make this creature that is a creature, is not human, does not have a soul, cannot in fact be fully human, but make it really easy to miss that for the characters in the book. We have the model now of the AI chatbot. And so part of how I developed his personality and what you see, without any spoilers, over the course of how the golem develops in the book is he's able to listen and then reflect back. You want to be protected, I will protect you. And other moments of what he picks up from other characters, it's always just sort of a reflection back of what this sort of, ancient chatbot personified, how the acquisition of language and the starting to seem really human happens. And so the personality traits are like pretty much what Eve thought she wanted. Someone protective, soft-spoken, but who would also want to protect her friends and family and sort of gravitate toward them first. But of course, we only just get to the line of what she wants the monster to be before we have to realize that building a monster is a terrible idea, generally speaking, and that's when we get more to the unsettling parts of the golem.
Right. There's lots of horror movies that are based very similar to AI taking their purpose a little too far.
Mm-hmm.
So Eve's relationship with her family and friends are central to the book. Did you ensure that these dynamics felt authentic?
I love a story where the friends and family draw you into and where you just feel that love even when there's tension among them. So this is really where I have to lean into the fact that writers are thieves. We all do it. We should all confess it. We are constantly pulling from what we know. And I am one of those writers. I try to not just straight up write my friends and family exactly as they are, but I definitely am drawing pieces, not only personality traits, but those family dynamics. And when is it that sort of dance of who's going to end the phone call first? Who's avoiding whom? Who plays this role within the family? And day job education-wise, I'm also at an MSW. I'm a social worker. So I'm fascinated by the systems that we all live in, and that any patient that ever walks in for a therapy session, it's not just that patient walking in. It's that whole system that they are enmeshed in. And that's really how I build out the relationships in this story and in anything that I'm writing, is not necessarily always through the lens of therapy, but through the lens of systems. And in the ecosystem of this person's life, where are they? Who else is around them? And who is pulling what strings? And how does this system work?
Yeah, all the different marionette strings in a person's lives. So were there any characters in I Made It Out of Clay that surprised you as you wrote them?
I think that a couple of characters surprised me in this story, and definitely Eve's sister, Rosie, was one of those characters, because I too am an older sister. I have a younger sister. I also have a couple of brothers, and I wanted to have this just influencer, over the top, perfect, annoying sister. And I was worried that I was going to make her too flat. And she kept surprising me. Every time that I'd get to the sister scenes, it was much earlier in the book than I thought, that there'd be little seeds of no, here's how she's a real fully fleshed out person too. And here's how Eve isn't taking her seriously enough. And the way that the character was, advocating for herself as I was telling the story of no, don't just make me the annoying little sister. And Rosie's partner too, Anna, the dynamic that they have and figuring out their relationship was a nice little side surprise over the course of writing the book.
So does your sister make any connection to that character, or?
I haven't asked her yet if she sees any of herself in Rosie. I will say my sister is definitely not a fitness influencer. She's a folk music player that does not exercise. But I do think that dynamic-wise, when she texted me after she finished the book, she was I really like the family stuff. So hopefully that means it landed.
That's the best you could hope for when it comes to family.
Right? Not, why did you write that about me?
What does your typical writing day look like?
I wish that I had a typical writing day. I am very much a steal my time and write at the margins as a proud parent artist. I love my kids. I have two small children. So I'm like an after bedtime and a when I can motivate myself to get up early and, whenever I can steal the time. I have a Monday to Thursday day job, but part of how I bought some of my time back was I negotiated with the nonprofit groups that I work with, like, hey, I just need to do everything Monday to Thursday because I'm going to be my client on Fridays. That's going to be my writing day. So on Fridays is when I do occasionally get to have what I would love all of my writing days to look like, which is like I get up and I get the kids out the door to school and I go to a coffee shop and I get a really nice latte and I put on my headphones, but I don't put anything in my headphones. They're just to prevent people from coming to talk to me. And then I just sit there and write and I tip the baristas really well and I sit at the table for way too long and I get more coffee. That's how I would love more days to look like. If I'm lucky, that's about one day a week. And otherwise, it's probably in my pajamas in bed, ruining my posture as I like huddle over my laptop trying to write.
That's hilarious and totally relatable. So did you outline the story in detail or did it develop organically? Are you a pantser or a plotter?
I love the pantser plotter question. And this book is totally an anomaly because I am 100% a plotter. I love to plot out a book. I love to, in fact, I will put in the chapter headings and drop in what is going to happen in each chapter so that it feels more like not paint by number, but like I know what I'm coming up on and like it reduces my stress and anxiety as I'm writing. That is me 99% of the writing time. I pantsed the heck out of this book. I just followed it where it wanted to go. And then I sort of went back and made sure that like the threads were pulled through and nothing because it was, I was like, this is not how I usually write. What is happening? I'm going to have to put a character on page 74 that I never mention again. And it worked for this book. It worked. That's what this book wanted, apparently.
The timelines kind of demanded it too.
Yeah, for sure. It was like, you can't diddle, just go.
It's got to go. Yeah. How did you approach blending genres like magical realism, humor, and contemporary fiction?
So I actually have a joke with one of the other authors who is in my debut writing group for the 2024, since this was my adult debut, Holly Gramazio, who wrote a really wonderful book called The Husbands about a woman who is not married and then comes home and finds that she has a husband. And every time she goes up to the attic, anytime the husband gets sent up to the attic, a different husband comes down. Great premise, wild story. But it's kind of magical realism. It's kind of rom-com. It's kind of weird. And she didn't really know how to describe it. And I was in the same boat. So we joked that we were in the where do we shelve them club of how. So for me, at least in my experience, it is much easier on the writing side to blend those different things because I love all of those elements. I love magical realism. I love comedy. I love slice of life and relatable characters and family moments. The writing part of it isn't hard, but I will say really candidly, and it's the part that you just don't know until you go through it for the first time, as I have this past year. It's really the marketing and the categorizing and the justifying why you blended all of these things. That's the harder part. It's the sell is harder than the writing.
Yeah, you almost want to just write it, let somebody else decide where to shelf it.
Right? Exactly. Can I just tell the good story? And then can you tell everyone it's a good story? But I mean, people have big expectations. And initially, there was a lot of marketing materials that were pitching it as a romance, just straight up as a romance. And I say this with all the love and respect for romance readers. I love our straight up romance as well. You don't mess with the expectations of romance readers. If they think that they're getting their book with a guaranteed HEA, that is happily ever after for the non-romance readers in the room, they're mad. And there were some early readers of advanced reader copies that was I thought this was a romance and it did not have this trope. It did not have that trope. It did not go through the beats. It did not have a clear and unambiguous HEA, which is true, no spoilers, but it does not have a clear and unambiguous HEA. Yeah, that's part of what makes it hard is there are expectations for certain genres and I respect them. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be. I'm just saying, yeah, can someone else please figure that out for me every time that I decide to go off script, off road with my stories?
Yeah, I totally recognize that. Right now I'm writing fantasy and there are romantic elements, but I'm trying very hard to, you know, blatantly say there are romantic elements. It's not going to follow the recipe of a standard romance. So
Yes, you are a
it's
smart writer. That is the word, elements. You got to lean into romantic elements.
I definitely wanted to make sure I didn't have a lot of angry readers on my heels, because I definitely agree with you. So, do you have any quirky writing rituals or habits that helped you get into the creative zone? So, your headset, is it noise canceling, or should we be, not necessarily talking about the fact that it's just to avoid conversation, because somebody might hear this podcast and want to chat with you someday in that coffee shop?
I know, I probably shouldn't have outed myself like that. I do listen to a lot of audiobooks and a lot of podcasts, so there is a chance that they will be on. Oh, quirky habit, I will say, and I fully blame my theater background on this. If I have the time, which I did not with this book, but usually I do, I will make myself read my entire book out loud to myself. And in smaller chunks, I'll do it, usually not when I'm at a coffee shop, but sometimes I've been the crazy lady in the corner for like smaller scenes, just to make sure, like, do these voices sound different? Is the speech pattern of this guy different from the speech pattern of the woman that he's talking to? And that's something that was really drilled into me as a playwright from my theater background, that like you have to be writing with different performers in mind. You have to really be varying your voices. And I really have a lot of pride in the fact that like my dialogue skills are pretty solid for that reason, but I still like have to pull out those tricks to make sure that it's up to my own standards. And so yeah, that's a big, I think, quirk for me. I don't know how many other writers. I know some folks who like have their Kindle read it back to them, or like they make themselves listen to it in some way. But I like with voices and stuff. I will like it out like I'm the audiobook narrator. I did not do the narration for the audiobook for this. Gail Shalen, who did, is incredible. But yeah, I feel like I learned so much from making myself do that, either scene by scene or the whole book when it's done.
Did you say at the beginning that you've also been a vocal coach, was it?
I've done voiceover work. I haven't been a coach for others, but yeah, voiceover work.
So you literally use like different accents, different tones. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I do. And having done it, that has also made some of the author events that I've done when I do readings live, I will purposefully pick a scene that has like the Yiddish baby telling a story and getting into her accent. And then she's telling about the old world and the original story of the golem. It's fun to be able to do some, throw out some different voices, especially if people don't know I have a theater background, because then it's sort of like, it's a real story time.
Everybody sits up a little bit more.
Yeah.
So what did you find to be the hardest part of writing for you, and how did you tackle it?
I think that not just for this story, but I think that like the hardest part of writing is to sustain belief in yourself and your story, because you have to have belief at every stage of the game, right? Like you have to believe that it's a good enough story to start writing. You have to have faith enough in the story and in yourself to crank out that first messy, ugly draft that you're going to look back on with shame later, but also with pride because you got it done. And then especially if you're planning to, pursue traditional publishing, and even, I mean, I should say too, I have a lot of respect for and love a lot of indie published books. And that's a whole process too. Like you have to sustain this energy. That's really hard to do. Like, because it is exhausting and because this doesn't necessarily pay you while you're doing it. Like you're doing a sort of all on spec, right? Like all on the hope that someday you get this story out there, often while you're trying to keep all these other plates spinning. And so to find ways to really root yourself in the story and to remind yourself that you're doing this because you love it and because you know that you have this story and other stories to tell. I think that that's the hardest part, and also the part that makes you a writer.
I love that, and it's so true. The imposter syndrome is real, and having the faith that your story is worth telling. Definitely. So, how do you hope readers will connect with the themes of I Made It Out of Clay?
Yeah, I hope that readers will connect with one or more of the themes just by virtue of getting sucked into a good story. And I think between the main character and the other folks in her life, I'm hard pressed to think of too many readers that won't see something or someone or some moment that resonates for them. And I think that if you can have even just one strand that's pulling you in, then those other themes just sort of wrap themselves around you. And that's where we like learn and change and maybe even, walk away with something from a story. So that's my hope. Like, I don't think anyone who picks up the book has to know or connect to everything in it. I think just like that one, you're one little in, and then be open to the rest of it. And that's how I would like to enter most stories anyway.
Yeah. So, did you ever find that some of the relationships, like you had a really strong family dynamic in your storyline, did you ever feel that those relationships would potentially overwhelm the plot itself?
I mean, I think that's always a risk, but I also think that, especially more and more, and especially when you have, a contemporary setting, we are all processing so much of the time that as long as you do have a very clear narrative arc for your protagonist, you actually kind of need to have a lot peppering the background and also going on and building out who those characters are, because that's what readers expect now. Like, we're used to having a whole lot going on. And, the flip side is, well, all the side characters just feel really flat, or the friend was just, an archetype or a stereotype. I think that that's the risk if you don't invest in all of the characters and try to root them in mentions of their past relationships or the thing that they always bring to the table. So while it is a balance, I tend to err on the side of, I'd rather have more interesting characters that you're like, oh, I'd kind of want to like go watch that spin-off show. If that character goes off and does something else, then, just focus in on my one main character and main antagonist and like the journey that they go on at the expense of like building out the world around them.
Right. So, speaking of spin-offs, are there any themes or ideas that you're excited to explore in the future with other projects?
I love that question because it's such a smart question, because the next couple projects that I'm working on are not like this. They would not be shelved in the same where do we shelve them category, but they all pull something that I learned from writing this book and some like theme within it that I wanted to dig in on more. So one of the projects that I'm working on now is much more of a straight up thriller, but with a real feminist twist. And it's because like the pacing of this book and like figuring out how to make every chapter a little bit of a cliffhanger made me want to lean in even more to like, could I have a like propulsive, like really pacey thriller? And I have loved writing that one. It has been so much fun. And then some of the other projects that I'm working on, one of which does have some romantic elements. I feel like I've learned a little bit more about exactly your wise language of, it has romantic elements, or there is a love story within this larger piece. It's always an education, right? To write something when you do push all the way through and like make it through that story. So while the next couple of books that I'm one out on sub already and one or two in the next couple of months that hopefully will also be up for consideration out on sub, they're very wildly different. And I can point to at least one theme, thread, or character that I made it out of clay launched in
That's
that
so
next
cool.
book.
So you have 3 in the hopper already written.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was working on one of them even before this, since I'd sort of like shoved a couple of other projects aside for it. And publishing is slow, man. Like, publishing is so slow. So while, yes, like this just came out in December, but it's been more than 2 years since we signed the contract on it. And I often say, like, like your friends who like constantly knit. We all have those friends, right? Who like bring their knitting. Maybe it's you. I don't know, Tina. Maybe you knit. I wish. I'm not good at anything like crafty, but I have friends who like they'll just sit and the whole time they're talking with you, they're knitting because like they need to do that. Or like a much less healthy example would be like chain smoking. That's me with writing. When I like have nervous energy, I have to put it on the page. So, when we're gearing up for the marketing stuff and when I'm all done with past pages and like there's nothing more I can do for I Made It Out of Clay, the only way that I could like calm my anxious creative mind down was to be like
Start
on the
something
next
new.
projects. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you could create your own golem, what would you ask it to do?
I think that I now know way too much about golems to think that it is a good idea to make one. And, if absolutely had to make a golem, I think that I would try to steer it away from like straight up, you are a protector, and instead be like, you are a community builder. You are going to be the buffer when folks are not getting along and help find ways to bring them together, and like aim for something really, really fluffy, because when a golem goes berserk, it's not pretty.
I'm thinking more laundry.
Yes, can we just have a manual labor golem who will do all of my laundry, all my dishes? Excellent answer, Tina. You should build a golem that's just like domestic golem. You could just take care of my household. That would be great.
So what's a book or author that's had a major influence in your writing?
There's so many. And I will say, having listened to a couple of episodes of your show recently as well, I know that I'm not the first person to say this, but at way, way too young an age, I read The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley. And I think I am still traumatized by some of the things that at like 11 or 12 years old I came across in that book. But the extreme world building was one thing. And also just the idea of this legend that I was already familiar with, right? King Arthur. But through the lens of women and other characters that were not emphasized in the original telling. I mean, I think that was still influencing I Made It Out of Clay, right? Like there's all these golem stories out there, but it's only literally in the last decade that there are some that center either a female looking golem or a woman who built the golem. There's only a handful of those sorts of stories. So that's one. But I was just a voracious reader as a kid. I loved the Oz books, like L. Frank Baum, who's a fascinating character in his own right. I think that, again, like when you go back to them, there is so much slice of life of like this lonely girl in Kansas who gets to go on this big adventure and all the stories that spin out from that. And also as a theater nerd, like a lot of playwrights, kicking it way back like to Shakespeare, but also Lauren Gunderson and all of these contemporary playwrights, Sarah Rule, who are taking stories that you don't normally see on stage and putting them on stage, Lynn Nottage. So yeah, I mean, I continue to be inspired by so many writers. One of my favorite craft writing books is actually Stephen King's On Writing. And my favorite piece of advice that he has in that book is if you don't have time to read, if you say that you're so busy writing, that you don't have time to keep up with reading, you don't deserve to write. Why should anyone read you if you're not reading other writers? So I hope that I never stop being just like a voracious consumer of books and finding new writers that inspire me all the time.
It's funny, I have been guilty of saying that. So
me too. I was called out by him saying that. And I was like, no, I have to get back on reading.
I listen a lot because, I'm always working with my hands. So I do a lot of listening to make up for it. But it's
audiobooks are books. I will die on that hill. Audiobooks are books.
I agree. The story is still there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you weren't an author, what do you think you'd be doing instead?
The honest truth is I have a day job. Like I am an author and I hope that I'm on the trajectory of in the next year or so, I'll get to say that that's my job. That's my sole job. But I work as a strategist for nonprofits, and it does feel like good, meaningful, important work to make sure that education and cultural programs are getting grants and happening and taking place. But I also think it's important to acknowledge that a lot of, including hugely successful writers, have day jobs. And so for any one of your listeners who is a writer and has some of that imposter syndrome because they have a day job, you're a writer if you're writing. It doesn't matter. If you have a day job, that does not negate you being a writer. There was a fabulous article in American Theater Magazine a couple years ago called something like Playwrights Don't Quit Your Day Jobs. That was all about how you shouldn't have that as like the goal or litmus test. And of course it's tempting, but that it shouldn't be you aren't a writer until. like you're a writer if you're writing.
Absolutely agree. So, what's your favorite way to celebrate finishing a book?
Sushi and champagne.
Love it.
I'll keep that
I
answer
love
nice and short and sweet.
how fast it came out of you. That was awesome. So, if I Made It Out of Clay were adapted into a movie, I mean, I think we already know who Paul is.
Starring Paul Rudd as Paul Mudd.
Who would Eve?
So I've given this a lot of thought because especially since it started as a movie pitch, I've been casting this thing in my head the whole time that I have been writing it. And I think I've landed that for Eve, I think that either Rachel Bloom of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend fame, or Lizzie Kaplan would both be excellent choices for Eve. It has to be someone with great comedic timing and who can really embody that I'm 39 and not feeling fine sort of, you have to she has to be a hot mess, but that you will absolutely cheer for and fall in love with by the end. So yeah, that's where I've currently landed, is maybe Rachel Bloom or Lizzie Kaplan.
I can't remember the name of the actress, but the series was called Killing Eve. Do you know that series?
Everyone keeps telling me to watch Killing Eve. I have not seen it yet, but now Tina, you're my 35th recommend. I have to watch Killing Eve.
So she does crazy really, really well. And I've seen her in other roles too, which I can't think of right now, but she does frantic very, very well. So you might love it. What's the best way for readers to connect with you and stay updated on your work?
Thank you for asking. Social media wise, I'm definitely most active on Instagram, which is just my name, at Beth Kander on Instagram. But I did recently also start a Substack newsletter that I'm trying to motivate myself to get out there more and put more sort of robust content in, especially if I ever exit social media platforms or who knows what happens with them. So those are two good places to start.
Okay. And are there any upcoming projects or events that you're excited to share with your fans? Like you've mentioned that you've got 3 in the hopper. Are you allowed to talk about them at all, or?
They're all still a little hush hush, but I'm hopeful that on at least one of them there will be something that I can share soon. So think good thoughts on that. And otherwise, since I Made It Out of Clay just came out in December, I'm still doing some events for that throughout this year. And I'm excited if you have folks listening in Canada. I'm going to be doing my first international events this summer. I'll be in London, Ontario, and then in Montreal. And so I'm excited for some of those events ahead too.
Awesome. What's the date for the Montreal? Do you remember offhand?
July 3rd at Argo Library. Mm-hmm.
That's hilarious. I will be in Montreal that weekend.
You should totally come. I'm going to be in conversation with my playwright friend, Jacqueline Goldfinger, who's awesome. I would love it if you came. We could do a little live stream for your podcast.
That's awesome. We are going to the Montreal Comic-Con that weekend. It's definitely...
That's so fun. Are you doing a costume?
Of course, I have to. It's something elvish, but I don't know what yet. So how do you like to engage with your readers? What types of things do you enjoy participating in when you're chatting with them?
I do love a good book talk. My favorite format for author events is in conversation with another writer or with a podcaster or with a librarian, and then opening it up to everyone else who came and really getting to talk with other people who love books just about the power of story and real questions that happen in that room is really magical. And even though I am an introvert and I'm exhausted and need to collapse in my room afterwards, I do genuinely love that. And also, especially over the course of the last few months when I had to do more sort of with my Instagram and stuff promoting the book, made some book friends on Instagram that will send me their favorite book memes and their recommendations. And, oh, this actually made me think of that part of I Made It Out of Clay. And I just love that too. There's a lot that you can say about the not good parts of social media, but the ways that it can allow people wherever they are and whatever their life circumstances to find those other people who have that same passion or interest or sense of humor. That's also pretty magical.
It is. I truly love that aspect of it for sure. And I find the book talk world tends to be very supportive and fun to begin with. So I hate that question.
Don't ask any question that you hate.
Finally, what is one thing that you'd like to say to somebody picking up I Made It Out of Clay for the first time?
Thank you for picking up my book and giving it a chance. I hope that you can walk into it with no expectations, but an open heart, and that you love it, but just for giving it a chance at all. That's all any writer really wants. So thank you for reading the story.
So do you want to show us that wonderful book one more time and tell people where they are able to pick it up should they be looking for it?
Sure. This is I Made It Out of Clay with our golem, and it actually has on his baseball cap the Hebrew letters Aleph, Mem, and Tav, Emet, truth on the baseball cap. And you can get I Made It Out of Clay anywhere. I love if you have your own favorite independent books shop or bookshop.org, you can definitely get it there. It's also in the Barnes and Nobles and large spaces of the world. Yeah, wherever you get your books. And if you are an audiobook person, and again, I am, my story graph has told me I've officially swapped over. I used to be majority print and like 30% audiobook. And this year I'm at 55% audiobook for my reading for the year. The audiobook for this one is also great. It's just, she's a great actor who read it. So if that is your method of choice, I fully validate it and you can listen to it that way.
That's awesome. So thank you, Beth. I really enjoyed getting the opportunity to talk about I Made It Out of Clay tonight with you. It was so much fun getting to know you.
Yeah, and I hope that someday we will cross paths somewhere at a con or bookstore or room full of people who love stories.
We'll have to find out where the con is versus where your event is and see if there's a method of triangulation there.
So cool. That would be very cool.
It would be awesome. So thanks again. And I really hope that those 3 projects that you have sitting on the back burner just catch fire.
Thank you so much, Tina. Thank you.